Hi, folks. Welcome to our weekly, I almost said monthly, weekly history chats. Thanks for joining me again. Um, this week's topic, I think, is one that comes up quite a bit, and it came up recently, so that's why it's on my mind, and it came up a couple times. So sometimes when something happens once, I just think it happened. It's just something that someone brought up. But when things happen multiple times, or a topic comes up multiple times, it's kind of signals to me that it's something we should be talking about, maybe. Um, this topic comes from a photo that I had posted last week on the Aurora Town Historians Facebook page. And it was a picture of, with Back to School. I featured some of the photographs that we have in the collection at the Aurora Town Historians office of our schools in town. And of course, before a lot of students went to the Union Free School District. There were individual one-room schoolhouses around our town, and one of these pictures was one that I featured from Aurora School District number 6, which was up near Sweet and Mill Roads, and the photograph was taken in 1913, and it shows the class picture. And definitely epitomizes a country school. And you had the students lined up and the teacher lined up. Again, it was in 1913. And one of the couple of the comments were about how miserable the students in the picture looked and how sad many of them looked. Even the teacher looked miserable. And then, of course, people started talking about why, in the comments on the various pages that this photograph was shared, of why people didn't smile back then. And the typical reasons why were repeated. And one of the reasons that people bring up most often as to why people don't smile in old photographs is that the exposure time needed for photographs back then was such a long time that you had to stay still for so long. And smiling, keeping a smile for a long period of time was difficult. So you would just keep your mouth shut and look very serious in a photograph because the exposure time was so long. This is true in the early history of photography. But by the time we got past the Civil War and to the turn of the century, the photographic technology had gotten to the point where the exposure time was not very long. And so, in fact, a lot of photographs that we see, in fact, probably most of the photographs that we see, either in your family collections or in the town archives, but just a lot of the old photographs, quote unquote, old photographs that we see where the people look sad or miserable, not smiling, were after the time period where they needed to hold their pose for the exposure of the camera. So actually, that reason is not valid in most cases as to why people are not smiling in a photograph. The other reason that people bring up quite often is that we've come a long way in dental care, and our teeth. We take better care of our teeth today than we ever have before. And in fact, back in the 1800s, a lot of people either didn't have healthy teeth or didn't have some teeth were missing, and especially in the poorer areas of our region or in the country, people could not afford dental care. And if they happened to lose a tooth or had to have a tooth removed, they couldn't replace it. So they would have missing teeth. And that was one of the reasons people have brought up as to why no one smiles in old photos is because the dental care wasn't as good and they didn't want to show their missing or very bad condition teeth. Um, this reason is also not valid. It's a good thought. It's one that I had pointed out previously before doing some more research on it and being enlightened. I just thought that was probably a main reason why people wouldn't want to smile. But if everyone's teeth looked like that, there would be no reason to be worried about it. People wouldn't necessarily uh, uh, smile extensively all the time in photographs, but if everyone around you had the same conditioned teeth, there wouldn't be a reason to be ashamed of your own teeth. Now, um, in some cases, there might have been reasons why people didn't were ashamed of their teeth or embarrassed by their teeth, the condition of their teeth. But that's not an overwhelming reason why people probably didn't smile in photographs. One of the real reasons, and the reason why people weren't smiling in photographs for so long into the 20th century, into the 1900s, um, is tradition. And it has nothing to do with the technology of dentistry or the technology of cameras. It has to do with that in old portraits, when portraits were painted, and then when we started taking portraits with photography, people were encouraged actually to hold a pose and be serious. It costs money to take, it cost quite a bit of money to take pictures and have your portrait done. So you didn't want to mess it up and you wanted to look serious. People took it seriously. So even people of wealth would take it seriously. So to have your picture took, as they would say, or have your picture taken, or you go to, it was a big deal. You dress in your Sunday best, you'd go to a studio, you would sit for a portrait, and so it was a big deal. So you wouldn't want to make light of it. And so actually, the tradition was for people to not necessarily say cheese. There's actually a story out there that people, photographers, tried to get you to say prune. So your lips would stay in a serious locked position and you wouldn't be tempted to smile. Um, so and the reason this was is because painters who would paint people, or if you would have your portrait taken and you had this giant smile, people would think, and it was just the societal thought at the time, was that you were either had a problem, like you were overly excited, or drunk. People actually thought maybe if you were captured in a too excited way, too happy, if you were if your image was made you look too happy, that you might be mistaken for being drunk or something else. That for some reason you had a mental issue. I mean, there were people actually that was the idea, where if you were painted, people would paint people with an overly excited expression on their face, a big smile on their face, that you would be taken as inebriated. So that tradition actually continued into the 20th century. So people would avoid smiling because they didn't want anyone to think that they were drunk or mentally ill, to get that impression. And that carried through from the 1800s. And so people in photographs would be careful not to smile too much. And so that, in combination with taking your photograph being taken seriously, to take that whole process seriously, led to people not smiling in photographs. Now, what changed this is that the Kodak actually came out with better technology of cameras, the Brownie camera, the pocket camera, where more people could have a camera. Um, you could take more pictures, but still, I know. So you'd have more candid pictures. You could take pictures of family picnics, things like that. Your everyday life, not just go to a studio and have your picture taken, where you had to be serious. But still, if you look back at old pictures of the early 1900s, like I said, the 1913 posed picture of the students at the one-room schoolhouse, they still took it seriously and didn't smile. So much so that there was one little boy, it appears, in that picture, one student from 1913, who was smiling, and people noticed him. He stuck out like a sore thumb because everyone else wasn't smiling. And the first thing I thought of when I saw that one student smiling and everyone else wasn't is, what's going on? What's wrong with him? uh, and he, but he seemed happy, or was he the troublemaker in the class? It's hard to tell. But he does stick out. And that was interesting to note, because today it would probably be the opposite. Everybody be smiling in a picture, and the one person who didn't smile would stick out. So it's kind of opposite. So what happened? Well, movies, actually, the motion pictures, as the 20s came along, you saw people in moving in pictures. So their expressions were filmed. And so as people were watching that, they saw movie stars and they saw people on film, on a screen, depicted with smiles and all other sorts of other expressions. So and it was normal. And so people started to stop being afraid to show expression in photographs and on film. And so you weren't necessarily considered, inebriated or drunk just because you were smiling in a picture. And that seems weird today to think about that, but that's really, if you read the research, that's one of the biggest theories about this, is that people were so concerned about the impression they were going to be giving in a photograph that would be permanent, that they would just stay still. So it really didn't have anything to do with the exposure time of the film or the camera. Now, anecdotally, I just looked up, kind of trying to see when this kind of changed. And what's interesting is there is one theory that some historians have looked up when that term "say cheese," when you take a photograph, when that first got started. And it is believed that that happened in the 1940s. And there's some stories, you can Google it, about a connection to President Roosevelt, FDR. But that's the time period that that we started encouraging people to smile big in photographs and to and look happy in photographs. Well, which is very interesting because anecdotally, I just went and looked in the high school yearbooks, at the East Aurora High School yearbooks, and kind of looked through each year to see when did people start smiling in the portraits. Well, 1923 is the first year that the yearbook had photographs, pictures of the graduates, and there were maybe 2 or 3 students with barely a smile. You get into the 30s and a few more students, and mostly the females were the ones that were smiling. The male students tended to keep a stern look. But by the time you got to after World War II, I noticed a big difference. Boys, girls, male and female teachers started smiling in the portraits, and big smiles too. So before that, you got a couple people who would, do a little like a smirky smile, not showing teeth, a partial smile. But by the time you got to after World War II, 1946, 1947, the high school senior portraits had lots of smiles, which was interesting because that goes along with the historians who say that they've traced back the idea of say cheese and photographers encouraging people to smile during portraits, that goes back to World War II. So the local East Aurora connection and what we experienced here in East Aurora, again, anecdotally, I don't have like specific statistics on it, but the East Aurora High School yearbook tends to lend credence to that idea that people were encouraged to smile in photographs starting around World War II. So why is this important? Well, when we look back at old pictures, we tend to think people were not happy. And I've actually read places where people make a judgment about how hard a person's life is or was at the time, and and they'll say, oh, they had a rough life. Just look at that picture. They were tough people, and they didn't seem really happy because they're not smiling in the picture. When in fact, they probably were just as happy as we are, or just not as happy as we are. But the photograph our image of them through 1 or 2 photographs is skewed because they're sitting in a portrait session being very serious, when in fact they did know how to have fun. And a lot of people enjoyed life just as much as we do. Their portrait, when they were taking the portrait, they were acting a lot more serious than the rest of their life would have been. So we get this kind of skewed view of someone's demeanor based off of a portrait. So, I mean, your great-great-grandmother or your great-grandmother might have been miserable, but not because she looked miserable in the photograph that was taken to her at a studio. And this happens with photographs all the time. It's quite interesting to look at old pictures. For instance, there was a picture of a local bank where women in the office, accounting office, the tellers, they were working on the adding machines and the bank machines, and they were all wearing beautiful necklaces and it looked like evening gowns and had earrings on, and someone had remarked, "Oh, they dressed up quite well for work back then. You know, back in the good old days when people dressed up for work." Well, people did dress up for work more than we do today. Our fashion has changed, but you can't make a judgment on how people dressed based off of many of the photographs you see. So in this case, all these workers were photographed at this local bank, and it's in a scrapbook, a photo album that we have preserved today. The thing is the staff was the employees were most likely told that a photographer was coming, and they dressed up. They wore their Sunday best, so it's not an outfit they would have worn every day. So again, we're getting this view that's not realistic of everyday life in this bank or in an office. So a lot of times when you see photographs of people that are when a photographer comes in, and back in those days, that's what would have happened. You wouldn't have had someone with your cell phone camera. People would know ahead of time, and they would want to look good, so they'd have their hair done, wear a nice outfit, probably their nicest Sunday best outfit, and put on their nice jewelry. So in fact, you probably weren't wearing all those fancy things every day, but that's what the photograph shows. So be careful how we look. We need to be careful how we look at old photographs, especially posed pictures, professional photographer photographs, because reality was probably a little bit different. When people look miserable in those old portraits, they probably weren't that miserable. They could have been, but they probably we're getting an image in our head that they weren't as happy as back then, and they actually were. And also you have photographs that show people looking probably different than what they did in everyday life. Gentlemen did wear suits and ties to the Buffalo Bills games and football games back in the day, but they probably didn't dress up. And you would dress up to fly on an airplane, those sorts of things. The standard was different, but we still get a warped view when we look at old photographs. People tended to dress up when they knew a photographer was coming. So thanks again for joining me. These videos are also going to be available on YouTube. I started a YouTube channel because some folks had said that Facebook wasn't the easiest way for them to watch, so I'll put these on YouTube. Any questions or comments you have, please send them along. One of the questions that had been brought up, and I never really even thought about it, is I'm not married to this time of 3 p.m. on Tuesdays to go live. Someone had said it would that they don't watch live, and most people don't. But that if we changed the time, that their kids could watch live and ask questions. Of course, you can ask questions whenever you want. It doesn't have to be live. But send an idea of a better time if you want to watch live, or you have a student in your family who wants to chat about history and live. I can certainly do it in the evening too, but finding a perfect time is almost impossible. But if there's a more convenient time, throw it my way, and we'll consider changing the time of when I go live with these. Again, these videos, I am the Town and Village Historian, but these videos are separate from my official duties as historian. So again, anything that I talk about here is not connected officially with my position with the town or village. Thanks again. Keep the comments coming, and thanks for supporting this project. I really appreciate it. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.